views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to Bronxtalk. With Election Day this week, we thought we would provide some third-party coverage of the Green Party. While tonight we'll meet candidates running for office under the Green Party banner. Like many third parties, the Green Party's existence is tied to issues that are worth discussing, Election Day or not. So we'll meet the candidates and talk politics some, but we'll also have a larger discussion of environmental, social, political, and economic issues that face the Bronx. If you want to join the dialogue and weigh in with your thoughts about the Green Party and this election or any of those issues, then call in at 718-960-7241 or email questions or comments to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org, and we read those on the air during a future edition of our program. But for the here and now, it's the Green Party candidate for Attorney General, Mr. Ramon Jimenez. Good evening. Thank you for joining us.
It's indeed an honor being on your program, Gary. I've watched it for many years. So we're honored to be on the program.
Well, thank you very much. And also the Green Party candidate for Congress in the 13th CD. That's the seat currently held by Charles Rangel. It's Daniel Villa Rivera. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you, Gary, for having us.
And also on the phone from Albany, Green Party candidate for New York State Controller, it is Teresa Portelli. Ms. Portelli, are you with us?
I am.
Good. Thank you for joining us. And we're going to chat with the guys in the studio, so you hang on there and we're going to get right to you in just a moment, okay? All right. Thank you. Mr. Jimenez, let's start with you. We were talking before the show about your long work in the Bronx and the city of New York as somebody who's interested in issues. You've been a journalist, you've been an attorney. Why run for office? Why run right now? And most importantly, why run under the Green Party banner?
Well, I've decided to run because I think the people of New York State deserve to have an option, an alternative. They deserve to have a party which with a progressive platform, which takes positions on fracking, on Common Core, on labor rights, which the Republicans and Democrats are not doing. I think to be a Green Party member now, we're attracting so many new people. We're attracting teachers who are being insulted by Mr. Cuomo, environmentalists who are afraid of fracking, workers who don't want zero raises. So these are the reasons why I'm running. I've been an attorney for 40 years. I've been fighting for social justice for 40 years. I've been a judge. I've been a professor. I've been a journalist. But I think it's time to provide people an alternative, an option, other than the two dominant corporate powers we have now.
I'm going to ask this question, and we've interviewed numerous Green Party candidates in the past. I'm going to ask each one of you to offer an answer to it. It's the obvious question, and I'm sure you hear it all the time. Well, you're in the third party. It's clear the polls show the Republicans and Democrats are going to battle it out, and you folks are, picking up the scraps at the bottom. If you don't really have a chance to win, is this worth waging the campaign?
Well, I think because of the issues like fracking, Common Core, labor rights, the issue of criminal justice, it's a must. And we are about to make history. We are about to become a third party which perhaps gets 9, 10, 11, 12%. Upstate, we're polling higher. Gary, you know there's so many people disaffected, angry at Cuomo. They don't see Astorino as an alternative. I think we can make history. That's why I'm here. That's why I decided to run.
Last question for you before we move on to your colleagues. It's very clear that, or it would be obvious, I think, that people who are left-leaning might support you and could very well support you, and that ends up, and I had this conversation with a couple of people, I said that the Green Party was coming on Bronx Talk, and they said, well, now you're going to take votes away from Cuomo, and because people will vote for the Green Party, then even a more objectionable candidate from their perspective, Rob Astorino, is going to end up being the governor. What's your thought about that?
Well, some of us don't see too much difference between Rob Astorino and Cuomo. We believe if you're anti-fracking, where do you go? Do you go to Cuomo or Astorino? No. If you're anti-Common Core, you might go to Astorino, but in terms of respecting teachers, just respecting the UFT, respecting just the rights of teachers, Cuomo's attacked the teachers, said our public schools are a monopoly. So we think because of all those reasons, you must provide people an alternative. The lesser of two evil politics has taken us to the cliff. We're about to fall off the cliff. The lesser of two evil politics is got to be destroyed. We have to go a new way, a new direction, and that's the Green Party.
Mr. Rivera, let's talk with you about Congress. Obviously, the other two candidates are working in New York State. Can you be an effective legislator in Congress without the kind of experience? Certainly, Charles Rangel brings generations of experience to Congress, even if you may not like him or like his policies or agree with everything he does. Isn't there something to be said for somebody with the experience to go into a body like the United States Congress and be able to maneuver and lobby and get their way? Isn't there something to be said for that?
Well, I think it depends how you look at experience. Being in Washington, D.C., for so many decades and being disconnected from the masses of the people and the problems that people face daily in New York City and in New York State, you are disconnected, and that is not experience. The experience is when we are in contact with people's daily problems. For example, we've been very, very active for a long time in the matter of wage theft. I don't know if...
Describe what you mean by wage theft.
Wage theft is when a person works X amount of hours a week or a month and is not paid for the amount that he is supposed to be paid. For example, in New York City alone, over $20 million are robbed from working people because unscrupulous bosses or company owners, employers do not pay their workers. So Rangel does not know anything about that.
What do you mean by that? I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not going to let you just get away with making that statement.
Thank you.
That's a lot of money. And when you say they don't pay their workers, we have laws in this state. There is you may not like the minimum wage, but there is a minimum wage. What does that mean? $20 million?
Most employers do not like the minimum wage, and they would like to throw us back to the period maybe a little bit before the cavemen and cavewomen. They think that $15 an hour, which is what the Green Party and what Daniel Vila running for Congress and also our colleague Ramon Jimenez supports, $15 an hour is nothing. Back in the 1970s, when I was working in the garment district, I was a shop steward in the ILWO, the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, for example. I was making more proportionately at $2.25 an hour than what workers now making $7.25 or even $8 an hour are making in these fast food.
So the money was worth more at that time.
Much more, of course. So these are the things that we've been fighting. For example, we've been fighting against the deportation of more than 2 million immigrants under the Obama administration. We've been fighting against all these police murders and police abuses, for example. And Mr. Rangel, although he supposedly represents the 13th district, a huge part of which is Harlem and Washington Heights, has not said a single word against gentrification and the displacement of working people there. So those are the things, the experience that I have that I would bring to Congress.
I want to ask you this question to get back to the finances of the minimum wage and those kinds of things, and that's a perfect bridge to our friend there in Albany, Ms. Portelli. Your website talks about a $15 an hour minimum wage for all workers. Number one, small business owners, many of whom are the ones, a guy who owns a bodega, you're telling him that if he's paying $7.10 an hour right now, he's got to double that wage for that minimum wage worker. While I understand maybe your real agenda is to get the corporate people and people who are really taking money from low-end workers, but aren't you hurting the small business? Isn't a guy who runs a legitimate small business and you're saying to him, you got to pay your workers twice as much, aren't you putting him out of business?
Well, when I say that as a former small businessman myself. Although there's a period when I used to be a shop steward in the garment district, and recently when I was an organizer for the American Postal Workers Union, and I've also been organizer for other unions and a community activist around housing and other issues, I was for a period of about 10 years a small business owner. I had a small store renting video movies.
So would you want somebody to tell you had to pay your people twice as much?
Nobody had to tell us, because we paid those workers, the couple of workers that we had working there, we paid them above the minimum wage at that time. And I'm talking to you 20 years ago, we would be paying them $12 and $15 an hour. So it is true, some businesses have difficulties, but the immense majority, and when we talk about the immense majority, we're talking about New York City, where we know that there is money out there. For example, these chain stores, whether they be fast food, retail, or whatever, they make the money. And many others that do not, whether they be restaurants, for example, that are not chain stores, or laundries, or whatever, they make the money. There is no reason why they would be in business if they did not make money.
Ms. Portelli, this bridges right into you as a candidate for New York State Controller. You're with us, I assume?
I am.
Okay. So one of the major issues in the city of New York right now, there was a very big story about it in the Daily News recently, and it's on the minds and the lips of everybody in the Bronx, is income inequality. If you do something like what Mr. Villa Rivera is suggesting, are you going, because this is what we're being told, are you going to scare away businesses from investing in New York and say, you know what, it's already too expensive for the real estate and everything else. Now you want me to pay more of those people? I'm taking my business elsewhere.
No, I think if you look at New York City, it is a unique area. Actually, it's universal. Let's be real about this. New York City, in the whole, it's global here. I mean, if we can't pay our people $15 an hour, a living wage, I mean, should we be in business? I think that there are investors. I think that there are small business owners. We have to be able to subsidize, if necessary, from a state level to pay people that minimum wage, because it is a living wage. And if people can't live, then what are we asking them to do? Then we're forcing them into other alternatives.
Is there enough money?
I really think it's a win-win all the way around.
Well, is there enough money in the state to do things like that? I mean, we hear all the time that there's no money for many of the services that people in the Bronx want, whether it be senior services or education or all the other things that come down from Albany. You mean that we should do more subsidies, which is undoubtedly going to raise people's taxes and, again, maybe even scare away business?
I don't think we have to raise taxes. I think we have to shift priorities. And if we shift priorities to the Green Party values about community justice and environmental awareness and diversity and grassroots organizing, I think we have the money. If we just shift the money from hedge fund owners and maybe from the charter schools and maybe from the people who are investing in these pie-in-the-sky things that they are putting money into, then maybe we're going to have the money for real grassroots community-type initiatives. Like if we had a state bank where we could make, instead of putting money into Wall Street, we're putting money into our own communities, the money would be there. Well, the problem is priorities.
Isn't
not
that...
the money.
Yes, I understand that. I mean, that's certainly a very socialistic concept, the idea of a state bank. But let's just get back to the general question that I asked you, and then we'll come back here to the table and ask these gentlemen similar kinds of questions. And that's the question about reapportioning wealth. You're saying the money exists, but it's going into somebody's pocket. How do you, for want of a better term, take the money out of those pockets and reapportion that wealth so it reaches people who are less fortunate in the Bronx?
Well, I think if we had a more progressive tax system, for one thing, so that we didn't have as many tax exemptions for people in the higher incomes, I think that there'd be more money available.
We're going to scare away big business people and big investors because that's the theory. You do that, and then all the people.
Look, Gary. I mean, are we going to say to people? Do you really think that the people who are investing in New York right now are going to go to like Bayonne, New Jersey, or or someplace else?
Well, that's what we were told about both the Yankees and Fresh Direct.
City has the the excitement. It is the center of the universe. I mean, that's the way it is.
I'm going to come back in here from a social justice perspective. It's so nice to say, well, Mr. Jimenez, that everybody's going to be equal, but aren't we then saying, you know what, and she really pointed it up, this idea of a state bank, does it take us out of the capital system that we have embraced as Americans over the generations?
Well, first of all, Gary, Seattle has a $15 minimum wage now, and business has not run out of Seattle. California is bringing a minimum wage of $15. Business is not running out of California. So in terms of, we're not talking about equality for everyone, but everyone should have a basic living. You should be able to work 40 hours and pay your rent. You should be able to work 40 hours and eat food and buy food for your family. We're not talking about everyone being equal. We're talking about a minimum wage so people can live decency. Can people live on $7 an hour and pay rent in New York City? No, they can't.
Your background, for folks who don't know, you were part of the effort to keep Hostos Community College open,
yes.
and certainly were very concerned about the new Yankee Stadium. Talk to me about that neighborhood. What in that neighborhood needs to be changed that you, as an Attorney General, could affect change, or that you think the powers that be in Albany should be affecting change on?
Well, first of all, in the whole area of criminal justice, we have an attorney general who doesn't speak up on criminal justice. The role of an attorney general is to protect the civil and constitutional rights of citizens of New York.
I just saw an ad before I came into the show where Eric Schneiderman talked about all the different corporations and elected officials who he's put to jail and all these other things that he's done.
How many bankers who committed mortgage fraud were put in jail by Eric Schneiderman? They paid big fines, but they didn't go to jail. They got get out of jail free cards. Mr. Schneiderman, the man who stole $1 million from the Puerto Rican parade, Carlos Velasquez, according to Schneiderman's report, was not put in jail. Mr. Schneiderman has allowed the stop and frisk of Bloomberg and Kelly when thousands and hundreds of thousands of constitutional rights were being violated. The court found that to be so. He stays quiet on broken windows. He doesn't appoint special prosecutors on cases like Eric Gardner. The Staten Island prosecutor will not indict the policeman Eric Gardner. He's too close to the police. An attorney general should appoint a special prosecutor. It's been done before. And by the way, one other thing, Gary, there is a state bank in Minnesota. Minnesota State Bank is not socialistic. In the United States, there's state banks.
Impassioned would be a good word to use. Mr. Rivera, let's just talk a little bit about the scope of the job for a congressman, which is, we talk very local with Mr. Jimenez, but for you, we've got to look more globally because obviously a congressman has more effect on that. What would you tell the president about ISIS and about handling the threats to all of us that come from across the world?
Well, ISIS, it would have been great if the federal government, if the military, the U.S., the Pentagon, had not funded ISIS originally, because they created this organization as a way of trying to block so-called governments that are undemocratic, like the Assad government in Syria, which the United States claims is undemocratic because it does not copy the U.S. model of democracy. And as a result, they have then supported ISIS and other similar organizations previous to in order to destroy the Assad legitimately empowered government, just like they fought against in Libya. But in this case, if the United States had not supported these terrorists, we would not have this problem today. So one of the key elements is just simply stop intervening in other countries' affairs. Let other countries decide on their own what they have to do, and then let's focus all that money. For example, Jimenez mentioned, and I'm sorry I interrupt here a little bit, but you mentioned something about a state bank being socialistic. Actually, it isn't. Socialistic, the government intervenes in the economy all the time. This was pointed out not by me before. A little before I was born, Karl Marx pointed this out, that the government intervenes in the economy all the time. The problem is that in a capitalist society, the government, the state, intervenes on behalf of the ruling class, of the rich, of the employers. What we would like would be a society in which the government intervenes on behalf of the working people and the middle class. See, that would be democracy and socialism.
Just to go back to my original question, the past being the past, if you were elected to Congress, what would you tell the president to do right now? People are, I think, very upset about what they see in the newspapers and this horrific incidents. I mean, I don't even want to describe them on this show. It's horrible.
Yeah, there is no excuse for what this organization, which calls itself the Islamic State, is doing. What we have to, I think, first is step back a little bit and point out and remember that this is not representative of all Muslims. That is, Islam does not preach that, and I say that as a person who is not a particularly religious person. I was raised up in the Pentecostal church, but I understand that Muslims do not preach what that organization, and this is very important because many people are pointing that as a reason why some type of a holy war must be launched against Muslims globally. So the main thing is get out of other countries' affairs, get out of the Middle East, get out of Asia, get out of Europe, and most of all, get out of Latin America. If we stop intervening in other countries, we will not be hated. The United States will not be hated as it is, and there will not be reason to kill other people, and American soldiers will not be killed. Incidentally, when we talk about international affairs, I also, in part of our platform, would be strongly support the independence for Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico was invaded by the United States in 1898, and it is still there. Corporations, U.S. corporations reap over $200 billion of profits from Puerto Rico. So the idea that the U.S. government or the state maintains or supports Puerto Rico is incorrect. It's the other way around. The Puerto Rican working class, middle class, supports all these corporations that are present there.
Ms. Portelli, let's get you into the dialogue. Why don't you address for me a similar question to the one that I asked the gentlemen here? If you don't have legislative experience and you want to do things like rewrite a tax code, while maybe you think that your ideas are correct, how do you get other people to, certainly in the legislature, if you want to rewrite the tax code, the controller can just make a suggestion, but everybody else has to vote on it. How do you, or how can you convince voters that you're equipped to be able to do that kind of lobbying to affect real change in, for example, the tax code in the state of New York?
Yeah, great question, Gary. First off, the Office of State Controller has over 700 accountants, all right? So we have lots of expertise in accounting ability, but I don't know how much ability we have or expertise in management and in leadership. And I would go back to the Green Party values.
Did we lose her there? We lost her. I guess they'll get her back. All right, I'm going to ask you, Mr. Rivera, a question that comes right off your website, and it's related to what we were talking about with the economy before. You talked about creating 20 million public sector jobs. Right. In a way, it goes back to my original questioning for Ms. Portelli. How are you going to do that in this day and age? We have 20 million jobs that can be paid for by our tax dollars or through the public sector?
Well, people don't realize it, but every month, and this has been going on more or less since 2007, since the stock market crash, the federal government is giving away, and I would like to receive some of that money, $85 billion. I said $85 billion a month are being given away to the banks so that they could do as they please, and there is no accountability. What are you doing with that money? Who's getting it? And so on and so forth. All you have to do is not even take all of it. We understand the rich have to be rich if they're going to stay in power in this country, right? So yes, take half of those $85 billion, let's invest them in public works programs. It's very easy. There's need for housing all over the country, for new schools, for medical care. We have
And you
millions
think-
and highways across the country.
I
The leaders
understand
there.
that, and you think that you, if you were elected, could begin to affect that change in Washington?
Absolutely, because we would unmask. See, you asked the question before about how much one can accomplish. Well, it is true. It will be one person representing whatever, and the rest will be Democrats and Republicans, hypothetically. However, one would also unmask the corruption that is present in the U.S. Congress. The U.S. Congress has just become a little club representative exclusively of the multi-billionaires. I mean, it used to be once upon a time it was even a little bit representative of local multi-millionaires, small farmers. Not even that. It's just big corporate international multinationals that are represented in the Congress right now, Congress and the House and in the Senate. So we feel that if we unmask all the corruption and all the things that they are not doing and doing, that will go a long way towards changing the policies.
Mr. Jimenez, I know we have Ms. Portelli back, and I'm going to get back to her, but I want to ask you a philosophical question because you've been involved in politics and journalism all these years. And is elected office the way to affect change? Is that the best way to affect social change in specifically the Bronx in New York and in the United States?
Well, Gary, what you have to understand is we don't want to be typical politicians. I'm not here to say vote for me and set me free. I want to be an instrument for tenants, for parents, for unions, for workers, for a host of political shows. I want to be a voice for
I appreciate
a lot
that.
of people who don't have a voice. I want to be an instrument for their empowerment. You know, we used to have politicians and we're about public service. Now politicians are all about business. We need politicians, a new model about public service. If you want to make money, go into business. If you want to go into politics, public service. Serve the people.
Ms. Portelli, I'm sorry that we lost you just a moment ago, but back to that question you were talking about, and we probably have about 30 seconds for you. You were just talking about how you, as less experienced, can affect change in Albany.
Yes, I want to remind people that the Green Party is an international party. It is a global party. It's in over 100 countries all over the world. I mean, this is the future. This is how we have to look at the world right now. I want to talk about the values of the Green Party. I want to talk about communities of justice. That means a living wage. It means that we are against mass incarceration. We are for amnesty for people who have been involved in the system, and we want to dismantle the criminal justice system and bring those funds back to the communities most impacted.
I think on that note, we're going to have to leave our friends from the Green Party. I know they all agree with me in reminding people to go out to vote on Tuesday. And to me, the dialogue on these issues is just really the vital thing. So, Daniel Villa Rivera, thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
Ramon Jimenez, thank you. Teresa Portelli, thank you. It's a candidate for Congress, for Attorney General, and for Controller up there in Albany. Just a quick note about our program on development in the Bronx and on the idea of a Cromwell-Jerome new district in the Bronx. We got a message on our Facebook page from Richard G., who said that Community Board 6 and 7 were very foolish to allow 3rd Avenue and Webster Avenue to be upzoned with minimal transportation improvements. They're building these areas up denser than when the 3rd Avenue L existed. They should have learned from Webster houses and the Twin Parks West that high-density, low-income housing and mediocre transportation don't mix well. So we thank Richard for his comments, and we remind you, if you have further comments or questions on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then you simply email them to us or post them on our Facebook page. Our email address is bronxtalk@bronxnet.org, and we read them on the air during a future edition of our program. Please like Bronx Talk on our Facebook page. Our archives are at bronxnet.org. And you find Bronx Talk on the lower right navigation bar. Next week, Controller Scott Stringer. The week after, on November 17th, a show about a fantastic